but I'll begin with an apology. I know most of the students thought I was very harsh. And there is a student seated at the back. One time, I had prepared a table on education in Kenya, and it lacked her province. And she stood up, she raised her hand and asked me, "Where is Northeastern?" Can you remember that? The one at the back. I can remember you asking me that question. She's smiling. She can't remember, but I can remember her asking me that question where I had left out Northeastern while including all other provinces and showing the distribution of education. Others thought I was too serious. Others thought I didn't care, but we all had a lot of pressures, a lot of challenges that we dealt with in this university. So it was not easy to teach. And many of you can attest to that, and I can say that's why most of the leaders are absent, because they don't like success. So I'll begin with an abstract. Within Kenya's contemporary urban landscape, a profound paradox persists between the statistical predominance of the informal economy and its spatial erasure. Although the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics estimates that 15 million individuals constituting 83% of the national workforce are engaged in the informal sector, urban planning and state policy remain tethered to a formalist bias inherited from the colonial era. This speech interrogates the systemic marginalization of the informal workers, from mama boggers to artisans and matatu drivers and their touts. They are rendered as nobodies or invisibles by a state apparatus that privileges corporate aesthetics and globalized modernity over the sustenance of human livelihoods. Grounded in autoethnic narrative and lived experience, this work advances a foundational critique of neoliberal development paradigms and modernization perspective through the lens of what I conceptualize as the geography of scars, the material and ontological imprint of labor on the Kenyan coffee and tea farms. The analysis exposes the extractive logics embedded within the global commodity chains and academic knowledge production. By weaving personal testimonies of survival, displacement, and institutional exclusion with rigorous geographical inquiry, the study deconstructs what it terms the Great Deception, a global economic architecture that depends upon the labor of the global South while systematically rendering its agents invisible. Central to this work is the introduction of Hutu feminism, a theoretical framework rooted in indigenous Kenyan ethics of dignity, mutual accountability, epitomized in the maximum of my mom, Mwatida Mugeikatea. what did you do today? And communal reciprocity. I challenge orthodox economic discourses that dismisses women in the informal economy as mere survivalists, instead positioning them as sophisticated strategists who navigate volatile supply chains through trust-based micro-equity arrangements, rotating saving groups, and strategic deployment of social capital. This work issues critical warning against the trap of formalization, arguing that contemporary efforts to bureaucratic informal trade represent a colonial and patriarchal imposition that systematically dismantles the strategic architecture of women and men's resilience. Rather than conscripting these vibrant economies into rigid and extractive framework, I advocate for a humanized economy, one that recognizes the informal sector is not a developmental deficit. The work concludes that the imperative is not formalization, but the radical legitimization of indigenous economic intelligence. It opposes the demolition of Ibada in Nairobi and calls for a transition from exclusionary spectacle-driven modernity towards an urbanism rooted in Utu, solidarity and recognition of the informal sector as a sophisticated ecosystem of care and local agency. Ultimately, the work envisions the creations of cities, not of stone, but of the soul. Acknowledgement. This work is not a product of solitary scholarship, but rather a collective composition. The intellectual and emotional labor that rendered this work possible was nurtured and sustained by a vast network of individuals. To characterize my experience as one of mere support would be an understatement. I'm a living testament to the principles of Utu, humanness, communal reciprocity that this work seeks to theorize and advance. My deepest gratitude commences at the hearth in Ngedo village, to my parents, my father and mother, who sacrificed their own comforts to secure school fees. You invested in a future you could envision but could not yet touch. To my mother, the dean of my first university, thank you for the syllabus of Proverbs and the nightly audits that instilled in me the discipline of accountability. To my siblings who served as my first research assistants and my most enduring safety net by assuming responsibility for my daughter, you held my world steady so that I might learn to map it. To my daughter and her father, my grandchildren, Lydia and Lucy and their father, you are my living legacy and the animating purpose behind the commitment to a more just world. I'm profoundly grateful to my supervisors who guided me with patience and intellectual generosity. The late Professor Michael Dako and David Kibo, they opened the doors to the formal language of academia, while my friends and colleagues warmed its otherwise cold corridors. A special thank you to Professor Syria Nyamwero and Professor Agnes Musyoki, my steadfast companions throughout this academic journey. To Dorothy McCormick, my research colleague, to Professor Patrick Kalila, who recruited me at IDS, I extend my appreciation for what you did. During my residence at Massachusetts and Kansas City, Elizabeth Ginepro, Professor Carl Coban, and Kalia Meriwether offered profound friendship and mentorship that sustained me across continents. Elizabeth Modsre, Philomena Tut, and Catherine Thule provided support that enabled me to bring my voice to global stages in Mumbai and beyond. I am also indebted to Loretta Ross, Nairi Rubian, Lida Pickborn, and Preston Smith for introducing me to an America of resistance and for guiding me through the intellectual community of Five College Women's Studies. My scholarship would lack both foundation and purpose without the Juakari workers and market traders who permitted me to witness their rare courage. For example, Moremi Joka's mother and other women at Sega Market who, led by Benedict Nyambura, gave me the true story of how markets operate. I'm grateful to Nyahururu Taveta Women Association, Wakagiri, John Nganga, Mama Joka, and Benedict Nyambura. Thank you for instructing me in the unrecorded feminist economics of everyday life. To Philomena Bari and Mwarimu Ignatius Gasheru, thank you for anchoring me in the ancestral wisdom of cultural heritage. To the strangers on crowded buses, the tax drivers, and lad people across Europe and America who opened their homes when my modest budget frayed at the edges. You invested not merely in a person, but in a paradigm. I'm grateful to those who provided the infrastructure of care that rendered this research viable. To Mwehaki and Wanjiru for loving and caring for my daughter as though she were your own. To Wanjoya, Angela Kamau, and Josephat Juma. Josephat Juma was the saving grace that supported my editorial work. I remember when my working paper was rejected by IDS on new entrepreneurs in rural Kenya. It was dismissed as lacking in theory. It was dismissed as lacking in policy. But Juma saved me. He published it, and I got numerous comments that were beyond explanation. Thank you, Juma, for restoring my life. I'm also grateful to my prayer partners, who include Shiroga Shusha and Mary Mobi. I'm also grateful to Lydia Gaiterera. I'm also grateful to Dr. Mungai Kamete and Josephine Kamete. Thank you for providing me the sanctuary and the faith that sustained me in my darkest movement. I don't even know that you know that the small booklet, Bakita Today, was written in your house after listening to the stories that you people used to talk about your experiences as care workers. To my sisters Anastasia, Lydia, and Jane, your prayers and practical assistance with mundane labors of daily life constitute the quiet work that renders this loud scholarship possible. I'm grateful to many other people, Peter Coughlin and Mwikali, Rusekasioka, the Garoyas, the late Mwikamba of Kamukoji, Wakanyi, Rosa Kereka, Teresa Hinga, Ann Jogona, Wamburageshimu, Tabitha Wero, Cecilia Gadhoni, Felix Kerodho, Wamboi Gaido, my students who always touch base, and my nephews. And in conclusion, I would wish to remember my late student, Shem Watako, whom I supervised as my first PhD. Unfortunately, he didn't live to eat the fruits of his PhD. So, these people have helped me write this work. And many people might be wondering, why did I write this book, The Scars on My Feet? If you look at my left foot, I have 3 scars which I incurred while picking tea and coffee. And you know, if coffee or tea pierces you, the wound takes long to heal. And that's what happened. That's why I have the scars. And these scars were revived while I sat in Cambridge at the basement. And I would see the students coming down to fill cups with coffee and tea, with cups and tea to go and write their thesis. But in their writings, they were writing about primitive peasants, backward peasants, people who will never learn, people who need smart technology, and all that. And as I sat there, I knew we were not primitive. I knew we were just people who things were extracted from us. I remembered while the scholars remained awake, drinking coffee to fuel their writing theories, I remained awake, drinking coffee to fuel the writing of their theories. I remember the stubborn soil embedded beneath my nails, the biting cold of the highland mornings, and the heavy damp weight of coffee and tea baskets pressed against my back. Even now, the 3 scars on my left foot, edged by injuries sustained during those years of labor, speak with quiet eloquence, testifying to a journey that I sometimes prefer to carry in silence. Coffee travels the world as sterile commodity, stripped of its origins. I too have moved through elite academic spaces where my roots were treated as invisible. I have sat in rooms where my labor was consumed as data, yet my story was unwelcome as theory. My academic life has been forged in the fire of these contradictions. They have compelled me to ask the most difficult questions. Who owns knowledge? What does resilience actually look like when the cameras are switched off? And who, within the hierarchies of the academy, truly earns the right to be heard? My survival has been a full-time job. There was a season when, squeezed by structural adjustments imposed by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, I found myself unable to afford a home in a safe neighborhood. Faced the unbearable rent, I moved my life into an incomplete house. I had no ceiling, no paint, and no proper windows, only the raw skeleton of a dream, yet it was mine. It was a home constructed from necessity and hope. I have also lived, necessity and hope. I've also lived through movements of violence and violation that left a deep cold fear lodged in my bones. I do not subscribe to the neat narrative that these experiences made me stronger. Rather, they made me honest. They stripped away academic pretensions and left me with the relentless search for knowledge that serves the invisible. The women navigating systems that were never designed for their safety, their dignity, or their flourishing. Academia brought its own wounds. I faced relentless stream of publication rejections and failed interviews for professorship at my own institution, but each refusal felt like a personal dismissal, not merely of my writing, but of my lived experience that gave that writing its pulse. Yet, each rejection sharpened my clarity. I came to understand that I was not fighting for the crumbs of institutional acceptance. I was fighting for academic legitimacy of the nobodies of the world. The Goba Ad Hoc Women's Group, Gorongo Matangi, the Nyahururu Taveta Women Association offered me a feminist solidarity that no classroom could teach. My mother's voice demanding nightly accountability, my brother's presence, the laughter of my sisters, and the prayers of my aunts, friends, and St. Peter Jumuiya became the scaffolding of my life. I was tutored even by strangers. I remember a taxi driver who told me, "Degowaga haria ikagio. A seed does not always land where one throws it." He was reminding me that life rarely follows our blueprints, but wherever it runs, you learn to stand, to adapt, and to grow. He taught me that when the world curses you, the only thing you must never do is to curse yourself. Through it all, the rhythm of the rosary and the quiet sanctuary of the Mass kept me anchored. My Catholic faith provided the language for endurance and the grace to begin again. In my academic life, I'm committed to scholarship of reclamation, to seek to restore dignity and agency to men and women of the informal economy, those whose labor built the world, yet whose names are missing from the ledgers of history. I seek to expose extraction and exploitation or in all their forms, intellectual and emotion. My principles are not abstract theories. They are carved from the bedrock of my body. They are social empathy, compassion, conscientiousness and respect, self-reliance and radical courage, reciprocity and gifting. These are the survival strategies that carried me through the red dust of the farm to the world stage. My story is neither linear nor tidy. It's not triumphant in the way success is usually packaged for consumption. It's a story of falling and rising, of of being broken and choosing the slow work of healing, and of being silenced, yes, choosing to speak. If my work carries any power, it is because it emerges from a life lived fully in faith, community, and courage to remain standing. So, Joki did a good job analyzing my work. So I'll skip the sections where I had presented my work and move to the section on decolonizing the research high table. For too long, African scholarship has been subjected to what Africa is described as the burden of the case study. We are expected to provide raw materials, the stories of struggle, while Western theorists provide the analysis. In my work, I reviewed this division of labor. I went to the prayers, the meetings, and the funerals of Juakari community. I sat in the shade of their ingenuity, and when they spoke to me, they were not giving me the data points, they were correcting my biases. This was a profound lesson in what Mignol calls epistemic disobedience. The push for formalization is often a masculine colonial design to make the fluid a dynamic legible to the state. By resisting the cage of the formal, the Juakari artisans preserve their radical agility. They remind us that the sovereign territory is not defined by a deed or a title, but the ability to negotiate one's place in the world. My work is not a solitary academic achievement. It is a collective composition. The Juakari workers, the market women selling githeri, which is a mixture of bean and maize, and the generous spirit who supported my journey are all co-signatories, not just bank account. As I move from the margins to the center of my own life, I carry with me the dust of Ngedo on my feet and the sparks of the Juakari in my thinking. We did not modernize these vibrant living economies to make them fit into a broken Western model. Instead, we must have the humility to let their system of Utu rebuild our understanding of what it means to be human in a globalized world. For example, when I see professors taking each other to court for positions, when I see people doing crazy things for things that they don't, why don't we ask John Nganga and Pastor Kehara how they negotiate their conflicts at Uhuru Market, where they have small spaces, when we spend a lot of money going to court for nothing, for position and for jobs. So everyday life as a living archives. In traditional Western academy, an archive tends to be a silent, climate-controlled room filled with brittle paper and the faint smell of dust. But for a scholar rooted in Hutu feminism, the archive is anything but silent. It's loud, mobile, and often painted in neon. The matatus, those colorful public transit vans, and the radio jiggles that float from the speakers of the roadside kiosk and Juakari workshops are what I have come to think of the archives. They are the decentralized living records of people's soul, constantly negotiating what it means to belong in a globalized world. Matatu culture, the canvas of subaltern resistance. The matatu is far more than a vehicle. It is a sovereign territory on wheels, a moving description of presence. Sometimes I tell my friends to imagine the matatu driver woke up at 3 a.m. and you wake up at 6 a.m. While you are driving, he has already done 2 rounds of taking people into the city. And then you had time to take your breakfast, to powder your nose, to check yourself in the mirror, and drive comfortably. And then you are crisscrossing with the matatu driver. Would you put yourself in his shoes? This man maybe drank tea from a can at the mama at the what they call Irima. And then also remember the trauma these drivers may have. He might have been walking to school 10 kilometers. He might have been dropped out of school because of lack of school fees. He might have dropped because of other things. So can we heal? We work towards the healing of the matatu drivers, and maybe we can resolve the problem of the accidents. So let's think critically about how we perceive things. So matatu art, it's called vandalism or informal. But to me, it's a record of political and spiritual resilience and resistance. Radio jiggles, it's consumer noise. Oral tradition, the evolution of the proverb in the digital age. Scrap metal, waste poverty, material archive, the retro remaking of the colonial world. And my mother saying, Mwatida Mugekatia, casual greeting, is a daily audit, a rigorous feminist demand for accountability. It was my first viva, the first defense. Networking, collaboration, and the African scholar. Networking is frequently promoted as the great equalizer of modern academic and professional era, a bridge capable of spanning the considerable chasm between the global north and the global south. Yet, for the African scholar, the bridge often functions as a one-way street, designed primarily for the extraction of local data rather than the genuine exchange of global ideas. My own journey from the University of Cambridge to the University of Nairobi serves as a testimony to the complexities, gatekeeping, and mechanism, and subtle exploitation that continue to characterize international collaboration. In the idealized fashion of academia, networking is understood as a reciprocal relationship. In practice, however, it is frequently operated as a sophisticated form of greeting. Throughout my career, I have observed a recurring pattern. Scholars from the global north seek collaboration from Africa, not out of genuine desire for intellectual synergy, but rather to fulfill their grant requirements or to secure research clearance. In such situation, I've always seen myself as a glorified research assistant. So the next thing is carrying the red dust forward, a manifesto for Lydia and Lucy. I'm afraid my grandchildren didn't come with me. To my grandchildren, Lydia and Lucy, and to the African scholars who will one day sit at tables, I've only just begun the rattle. I leave you not merely a story, but a map. This is not static, cold cartography of the colonizer, drawn to confine and control. It is the living, breathing geography of Hutu feminism, etched in lead dust and carried in the sole of your feet. Within the hallowed halls of Cambridge, the University of Nairobi, I learned that the world often tries to formalize the spirit. It tries to take the vibrant and rural beauty of the market and the juakari shed and kiosk, it away in a cage efficiency and legibility, to make it fit neatly into boxes that were never designed for it. But I have spent my life learning what my mother and my grandmother already knew in their bones. The most enduring system are those built on care and on radical, unbreakable interconnectedness of the people. Lydia and Lucy, when you look at the 3 scars on my left foot, I do not want you to see them as marks of poverty. See them instead as my first doctoral thesis, written long before I even entered a lecture hall. They are the living record of a woman who traversed deep valleys and scaled relentless ridges, who carried goods and hopes on your back to ensure that your path through this world would be a little smoother, but no less grounded on the soil that shaped her. I'll skip the turning points. Those who want to read more can buy the book outside and move on to kitchenizing the boardroom. In reimaging the spaces where power is exercised, I have forged a manifesto that I call kitchenizing the boardroom. For decades, feminist geography and development economics have focused their efforts to try to bring women to the table. Yet this approach begs a more fundamental question: what if the table itself is the problem? The traditional boardroom, as we have come to know it, is a space defined by extraction, hierarchy, and cold efficiency. It's an environment that views my neighbor's coffee as mere commodity and treats my labor as a cost to be minimized. Kitchenizing the boardroom, by contrast, represents a radical act, bringing the logic of the fireside space into the halls of power, whereas the boardroom prioritizes accumulation. The kitchen operates according to a different principle altogether, that of sustenance. So what I'm simply saying here is that our women are aspiring to go to the boardrooms, but how are they going there? Are they going there to take their philosophies and ideologies, or are they going there to join what is considered the mainstream, and that is the masculine frame? So instead of women going to claim that space of the masculine space, they should fight to bring the feminine ideology of Hutu, where the women gather together. They'll give you a lesson if you happen to give birth on the roadside. But I know one journalist, when a woman went to the to the TV station with her night pajamas, instead of giving her a lesson, she took the cameras. Here is a mad woman coming to the station with pajamas. But if it was at Uhuru Market and Nganga would testify, they would have given her a lesson, given her water to drink, and sat her down. That's what I'm saying, kitchenizing the boardroom. The other thing I want to say is that we should see equality like the Agujas Bay. As a geographer, and Belta can testify, Agujas Bay is the meeting point of two ocean currents. The Atlantic Ocean meets the Indian Ocean current, and when they meet, they don't submerge each other. They swell. One maintains its identity and the other one maintains its identity. And together they make the ocean beautiful, and they allow the flora and the fauna of the ocean to grow and survive. So this is the kind of equality I envision. Equality where we are beggar qua beggar, where it's not statistics, 70% men and 70% women. What I want is the women to bring the ideology, the men to bring the ideology, and we coexist. Those of you who have gone to the Tana River Delta, you have seen how the Tana River flows into the ocean, and after flowing in for many long distances, trying to survive with its silted waters, it gets swallowed up by the Indian Ocean, and you can never tell whether there was silted water. So that's the kind of equality I would like you to have. The equality whereby we stand beggar qua beggar, each with the ideology of care, without submerging the other. I'll stop there, but I have a bakshishi, like the market women do. And ugari sosa. And I hope Kamau will not be annoyed with me. People going to court for no reasons. Kamau, you knew where my office was. As I sat in my office, the Dragon Parade, as I sat in my office, I would hear noise outside. Children practicing the Dragon Parade. In colored eye attire, the students would lift the dragon and march. I would imagine Njeri, whose blood was spattered to cover the university ground, crying. She was killed while resisting colonialism. Should be crying because of the way we were taking up foreign values which they died resisting. When I look at the university towers where we are, we had engineers, we have quantity surveyors, we have interior decor, we have architects, but the building was built under closed walls. Our student engineers would not come to see what was happening, and nobody really came. Neither was the literature department. They couldn't write poems on the changing skylines. So what are we doing? In Ed 2, where we used to hold the meetings, you may wonder why Kamau I never used to come to the meetings. When looking at the meetings, there was a big picture of the dragon. And I would look at the dragon and I visualize, the dragon coming to swallow and then coiling itself. I would imagine the dragon swallowing me and swallowing all our economy, swallowing everything. So I thought if I stayed in that Ed2, it would be difficult to live in that dragon. And then when I look at this building, why don't we have a romantic Maasai warrior image standing on the wall? Why don't we have the big fives on the wall? Why don't we have the grains in Western Kenya? Why don't we have the fishing boats from Lake Victoria? Why don't we have the coconut tree, the zebu cows on this wall? So my question is, are there universities in Africa or African universities? Kamau, I did not acknowledge you in my acknowledgement. I know you have helped me in crying sometimes, but if you can answer that question, I'll be happy. And then I would like you to take the message. Let them restore the independence of the IDS. Let them not park IDS where it is. That is my prayer, which I pray every day. We are known for destroying institutions which were handed to us. Let's preserve them. Let's preserve traditions. Don't ask me questions because I'm tired. You can read the book and get in touch with me through my email, through my WhatsApp, and I'll answer them. Because what I want is, Kamau Moremi, you are not yet 60, to answer those questions. Do we have African universities or universities in Africa? Shall we allow our institutions to be destroyed? For me, I was not able to cope. I gave up, I surrendered.